I will not carry a gun, Frank. When I got into this war, I had a very clear understanding.
Everyone remembers Hawkeye Pierce as the funniest man in Korea, the one with the comeback for everything, the one who could diffuse any situation with a line so perfectly timed it felt like the universe itself had written it. The one who laughed louder and longer than anyone else in that camp, who turned the war into a performance, who made the 4077th feel, on the best days, like somewhere a person could survive. The older I get, the more I think all of that was the problem. Because here is the thing about Hawkeye that the show spent 11 years showing you without ever quite saying out loud. The humor was not proof that he was okay. It was proof that he had found a way to not be okay in a manner that everyone around him could enjoy. And there is a specific kind of loneliness that lives inside that arrangement. A loneliness that gets harder to see the funnier you are. A loneliness that Hawkeye Pierce carried from the first episode to the last, and that the show, for all its brilliance, only fully examined once. That one time nearly broke him completely. So let's go back to the beginning, not the pilot. Earlier than that. Before Korea, before the army, before the 4077th gave him an audience. Hawkeye grew up in Crabapple Cove, Maine, small town. His mother died when he was very young. The show references this occasionally, obliquely, in the way people reference things that shape them so fundamentally they no longer have language for the shape. His father was a doctor, a good man by every account Hawkeye gives of him, a man Hawkeye loves with a completeness that is almost aching to listen to. He writes to him constantly. He talks about him with a warmth he extends to almost no one else in the same register. Drop a comment and tell us whether you think Hawkeye's relationship with his father is the most important relationship in the entire show. Because the longer I have thought about this character, the more convinced I am that it is. And I think what comes next in this video will explain why. Now here is the first piece of evidence. Hawkeye Pierce became a surgeon. His father was a surgeon. He grew up watching his father save people, and he chose to do the same thing.
It's inhuman to serve the same food day after day.
That is not an unusual story. Plenty of people follow their parents into medicine. But there is something specific about the way Hawkeye practices surgery that is worth examining, because it goes beyond professional competence into something that looks more like compulsion. Hawkeye is the best surgeon at the 4077th. The show establishes this early and consistently. But watch what happens when he cannot save someone. When the patient dies despite everything he has done. The reaction is not grief in the ordinary sense. It is something sharper, more personal, something that looks, if you watch it carefully, like it is attacking him rather than simply arriving. He does not process surgical failure the way a person processes loss. He processes it the way a person processes failure. For Hawkeye, a patient dying is not just a tragedy. It is evidence of inadequacy. And a man who is constitutionally unable to tolerate evidence of his own inadequacy is a man who will work without rest to avoid producing any. That is the engine driving Hawkeye Pierce. Not heroism, not altruism. Those are real too. But underneath them, running the whole machine, is a terror of not being enough. And a terror that almost always has a specific origin. His mother died when he was young. The details the show provides are sparse and offered sideways, the way Hawkeye offers everything painful. But the math is not complicated. A child who loses a parent has an experience that, depending on how it is processed and what support surrounds it, can leave a very specific mark. The mark that says, "The people I love leave." The mark that says, "I could not stop it." The mark that says, "If I become capable enough, maybe next time I can." Now, if deep dives like this are something you want more of, subscribing takes about 2 seconds and it means you never miss one. We go this deep on MASH regularly, and some of the upcoming ones will go to places this show almost never went. Here is the discovery that changes how you watch every single scene in the series. Hawkeye cannot let people leave. Not willingly, not peacefully. He has built an elaborate system of behavior, of humor and irreverence and constant noise.
You do me.
Designed to keep people close and present and engaged. As long as he is funny, people stay in the room. As long as he is interesting, people stay in the conversation. The performance is not vanity. The performance is attachment. It is a child who learned very early that the way to keep people from disappearing is to make yourself impossible to walk away from. Watch how Hawkeye behaves when he is ignored, when a joke doesn't land and the conversation moves on without him, when someone leaves the swamp without engaging. There is a flicker there, very fast. A micro-expression of something that is not quite panic but is adjacent to it. And then the next joke comes, louder, sharper, aimed more precisely. The performance recalibrates, the audience is won back. Most viewers read this as confidence. It is the opposite of confidence. It is a man who has never fully believed that people will stay unless he keeps earning it. Now follow that forward into every relationship Hawkeye has at the 4077th. Trapper John, B.J. Honeycutt, the two men who occupy the same bunk room, the same friendship slot, the same position in Hawkeye's life. The show presents these as the great friendships of his existence, and they are. But look at the dynamic inside them. Hawkeye gives constantly. He initiates, he performs, he plans the schemes and delivers the punchlines and absorbs the emotional weight of the friendship, and then offers more. Trapper and BJ both receive this. They give back, genuinely, but in smaller quantities and with less consistency. The friendship is slightly unequal in a way the show never explicitly names, and here is the detail that matters most. Trapper left without saying goodbye. He was gone before Hawkeye woke up. After years of that friendship, of that particular closeness, of everything they built together in that swamp, Trapper was simply not there one morning. And Hawkeye had to absorb that, had to absorb the fact that the person he had been closest to had chosen to leave in a way that produced no closure, no ceremony, no acknowledgement of what they had been to each other. The show moves past this quickly. Hawkeye is upset. He drinks. He makes a few bitter jokes. And then BJ arrives and the machinery of the show continues. But stay with that moment a little longer. A man who organized his psychology around keeping people from leaving, whose deepest wound is the experience of someone he loved disappearing without warning, was left without warning by his closest friend, and responded by doing what he always does. He made it funny. He processed grief as material. He gave the audience something to laugh at so they would not see that he was sitting inside exactly the experience he had built his entire personality to avoid. That is not resilience. That is reflex. There is a difference. The BJ years read differently once you see it. Hawkeye is slightly more careful with BJ than he was with Trapper, slightly less reckless with the friendship, as if something was recalibrated. After that morning, he woke up alone, as if he understood, without being able to say it, that the system he had been running had a flaw he had not previously accounted for. The person you are trying to keep from leaving can always leave, and when they do, the jokes that kept them there are not enough to fill the space they leave behind. Here is the relationship in the show that most people read as simple antagonism, and it is not that at all. Frank Burns, Major Frank Burns, the pious, pompous petty officer who occupies the third bunk in the swamp for the first 5 seasons. The target, the obstacle, the institutional authority that Hawkeye's irreverence exists to puncture. That reading is accurate as far as it goes, but watch what Hawkeye does with Frank in scenes where the comedy is not the point. Watch how persistent the antagonism is, how personal. Hawkeye could ignore Frank. He is manifestly more intelligent, more talented, more respected by everyone in the camp.
It's either liquid steak or chocolate pudding with gristle.
He could dismiss Frank and move on. He does not do that. He engages, constantly. He returns to Frank again and again with a precision that looks less like comedy and more like compulsion. Frank Burns represents a specific kind of failure that Hawkeye finds intolerable. The failure to be good when being good is available as a choice. Frank is not a bad person because the war made him that way. Frank is a bad person who uses the war as cover, and for a man whose entire identity is built around the idea that the right choice is always available if you care enough to make it, Frank's existence is a personal affront, a challenge to the premise Hawkeye's entire self-image depends on. When Frank finally leaves after season 5, something shifts that the show does not quite name. Hawkeye has won, the antagonist is gone, and yet the anger does not leave with him, because it never really lived in Frank. Frank was a container for something Hawkeye needed to put somewhere, a target that absorbed the rage so cleanly that nobody, including Hawkeye, ever had to ask where it actually came from. Winchester arrives and the dynamic shifts, becomes more interesting and more equal, but the anger finds its way to the new address without missing a beat. Here is the contradiction the show builds into Hawkeye and never fully resolves. He is the loudest voice in any room. He has opinions about everything and states them without hedging, without softening, without leaving much space for the possibility that he might be wrong. He is the moral conscience of the 4077th. He rages at the war, at the bureaucracy, at the brass, at the cruelty and waste of everything surrounding him. He is, in this specific mode, magnificent. But here is what the show does not draw your attention to. Hawkeye is always right. The show structures reality so that his moral position is correct. His anger is always justified.
Empty as hope.
His indignation is always appropriate. And this is presented as evidence of his virtue. But think about what it costs a person to be always right, to build a self-image around the certainty of your own moral clarity, to never be in a position where you have to sit with the possibility that you were the problem. Hawkeye makes mistakes. The show occasionally allows this, but they are almost always medical mistakes, processed as trauma rather than as moral failure. His interpersonal mistakes, the times he is cruel to Margaret, dismissive of Frank, careless with Radar, unkind in ways he has the intelligence to know better than, these are not examined in the same register. They are absorbed into the character's general lovability, and he never quite has to reckon with what he has done. That is not a character flaw the writers put there on purpose. It is a character flaw that exists because they were not willing to make Hawkeye genuinely uncomfortable about his own behavior. And a man who is never made genuinely uncomfortable about his own behavior stops growing at the exact point where growth was most necessary. Now here is the relationship that most MASH analysis gets almost entirely wrong. Hawkeye and Margaret. Their dynamic is usually described as love-hate, two strong personalities in friction. That description is accurate and it is also insufficient. Watch what Hawkeye does to Margaret in the early seasons. He mocks her, consistently, precisely. He targets her professionalism, her authority, her relationship with Frank Burns, her desire to be taken seriously in an institution that does not take women seriously. He does this with wit, and the audience laughs, and the show frames it as justified because Margaret is an antagonist. She represents the institutional rigidity that Hawkeye's irreverence exists to challenge. But the mocking is personal, and it is specifically aimed at a woman who is underneath the rigidity, as trapped and as lonely as he is. Margaret chose the army because there was no other institution that would give her ambitions room to breathe. She is professional because professionalism is the only armor she has.
Affectionately calls her Parallel Parker.
Sounds like there's a wonderful...
She is isolated in a camp full of men who patronize her, and Hawkeye, the most vocal champion of decency in the entire series, is one of the people doing the patronizing. The show knows this. As the seasons progress and Margaret becomes more fully human on screen, Hawkeye's treatment of her becomes more complicated. There are episodes where the armor on both sides gets briefly removed and you see two people who are more similar than either of them would comfortably admit. The chemistry in those moments is not romantic tension, it is the shock of recognition. Two people suddenly seeing themselves in each other and not knowing what to do with that. The show never fully resolves this. Because resolving it would require Hawkeye to acknowledge that he has been part of Margaret's problem for years. So instead they achieve a warmth that lives just below the level where accountability would have to live. Close enough to suggest growth, distant enough to avoid requiring it. Here is something the show handles with more honesty than most viewers credit. Hawkeye's relationship with women runs across 11 seasons like a pattern that repeats before he has noticed it is repeating. He pursues, he charms, he is funny and interested and genuinely present in a way that feels to whoever is receiving it like being truly seen. And then the relationship ends. He moves on to the next one with the same ease, the same charm, the same performance of effortless confidence. Watch the moment just after each of those connections ends. Watch his face when the woman is out of the frame and the scene has not quite moved on yet. There is something there that looks like a man who ran a specific experiment and got the result he already expected and is now quietly absorbing the confirmation. He does not sustain intimate relationships at the 4077th. Not one across 11 seasons. The reason is not that the right person never came along.
For it, and that's in order. There's your armband and logbook. Here's your belt. Hold.
The reason is that sustaining something requires letting someone close enough to eventually leave. And Hawkeye Pierce has been protecting himself from exactly that since he was a child watching his mother disappear. The jokes are easier than intimacy. The jokes keep people warm and present without ever requiring him to be vulnerable in any way he cannot immediately reframe as comedy. Now here is the piece of evidence most people watch but never consciously register. There is a specific quality to Hawkeye in the moments between crises. When the helicopters have stopped coming, when the OR is quiet, when the camp is resting and the noise has temporarily lifted. Watch what Hawkeye does in the quiet. He does not rest. He fills the space. He talks when there is no one who particularly needs him to talk. He generates activity. He creates schemes and distractions and projects. He finds things to be funny about. He turns the absence of crisis into a kind of performance, because without the crisis, without the surgery, without the humor and the schemes and the insubordination, there is just the space, and Hawkeye has never learned to inhabit the space without filling it. The men who came back from the Second World War, the ones who had been in active combat for years, often described a specific difficulty. Not the nightmares, though those were real, a difficulty with stillness. An inability to be alone with themselves in a room that was not asking anything from them. Because they had organized everything around responding to what the situation demanded, and without a situation demanding something, they did not know who they were supposed to be. Hawkeye came to Korea already wired that way. The war did not create the difficulty. It confirmed it. It gave him a context in which the constant noise and motion and performance were not just personally necessary, but structurally required. Korea needed him to be the person he already was, and going home was going to mean living without that justification. Here is the question the show never bothers to ask out loud. What does Hawkeye Pierce want? Not what he wants in any specific episode. Not what he wants from any particular relationship or situation. What does he actually want for himself in the private interior of his own life, separate from what the crisis of the week is asking from him? The show cannot answer this question, and the reason it cannot answer it is the most revealing thing about the character. Because Hawkeye has never fully developed the vocabulary for his own wants.
Yeah, how can you frost us? Think of all we've been through together.
We got you drunk,
He knows what he is against. He is against the war, against bureaucracy, against injustice, against cruelty, against the waste of young men's lives on behalf of ideas that do not hold up under scrutiny. He is the most articulate person in any room when the subject is what is wrong. But what does he want? What does Hawkeye Pierce look like in a life that is working? What does he actually need from another person? What would rest feel like to him? What would enough feel like? He does not know. And the tragedy, the real tragedy underneath all the others, is that he has been too busy being needed to ever sit still long enough to find out. Now here is the scene that changes the entire show, if you find the right frame for it. Hawkeye drinks. This is presented as comic texture throughout most of the series. The still in the swamp, the elaborate cocktails, the casual, daily, consistent consumption that runs underneath every episode like background noise. The show treats it as a charming eccentricity. But run the math differently. A man who drinks every day without fail, not recreationally, but as routine maintenance, managing the gap between what he is being asked to absorb and what he can actually absorb. That is a coping mechanism so embedded in daily life it has become invisible. To him and to the audience, nobody around Hawkeye is concerned. Because the drinking is funny. Because he makes it funny. Because a man who can make his own dysfunction entertaining will always find an audience willing to be entertained instead of worried. Hawkeye never sleeps well either. He is awake when others are sleeping. He paces, he reads, he talks to people who are not there. Hold those two things together. A man for whom neither waking nor sleeping offers any real rest. The jokes were the only relief that worked consistently. And the moment they stopped working, something in Hawkeye Pierce began to fracture. Which brings us to the episode everyone who has seen it remembers and nobody has fully processed. In the final season, Hawkeye has a breakdown, a clinical, complete psychological collapse. He is evacuated to a psychiatric facility and treated by Sidney Friedman, who the show uses here with a seriousness and precision it had never previously attempted. The breakdown has a trigger, a trauma so severe that Hawkeye's mind had rewritten it to make it survivable. What most people focus on is the trauma itself. But the more interesting revelation is what the breakdown requires Sidney to do to get there. He has to systematically dismantle every layer of performance that Hawkeye carries. The jokes do not work on Sidney. The charm does not work on Sidney.
You mentioned something about a tidal wave and...
Sidney has seen Hawkeye enough to recognize the machinery and wait patiently outside it for the man underneath to become available. Watching Hawkeye realize that this particular audience cannot be won with any tool he currently has is the most revealing he has ever been in 11 seasons. All of it stops. The humor, the performance, the constant noise. What is left when it stops is a man who does not know how to be in a room without the armor on. A man looking at himself without the glass between them for the first time, possibly ever, and finding the view almost unbearable. The episode reveals that Hawkeye had been performing survival for so long that he had forgotten there was a difference between performing it and achieving it. Alan Alda co-wrote it. He drew from real emotional material, and you can see that. There is nothing being acted in the conventional sense. He was never fine. He was excellent at seeming fine. Those are not the same thing. Here is what I keep returning to. The show ends. The war ends. Hawkeye gets in a helicopter and flies away from the 4077th, and the word goodbye is visible on the ground below, spelled out in stones by the people who loved him. He does not arrange this. The camp gives him the send-off his departure deserves, the ceremony that Trapper never gave him. He sits in that helicopter looking down at the word as it shrinks beneath him, and for once in 11 seasons, he has no line ready. No joke to reframe the moment. No performance prepared. Just a man and a word and the distance growing between them, which is maybe the most honest Hawkeye Pierce has ever been. And Hawkeye watches it from the air, his face doing several things at once. Relief, grief, but also something that looks like a man realizing that all the people who loved him managed to love him without ever quite seeing him clearly. They saw Hawkeye the surgeon, the wit, the rebel, the conscience, the man who could walk into any room and make it better with a line. They did not see the child from Crabapple Cove who watched his mother die and decided somewhere in the aftermath that the only safe thing to do with love was to make yourself so useful and so entertaining that people never got the chance to choose to leave. He is going home to his father, the one person who loved him before the armor existed, before the jokes, before the performance, the one person who saw the person before the survival mechanism grew up around it. And maybe that is enough. Maybe it is even what he needs, but the question the show leaves open is whether he will ever take the armor off, whether he even knows how anymore, whether the jokes will follow him to Maine through the nights he cannot sleep, and the quiet that has never felt safe to him, and the space between crises where he has never learned to simply be. The tragedy of Hawkeye Pierce is not what the war did to him. The war revealed what was already there. A man of enormous intelligence and talent and heart who built his entire life around being needed, because being needed was the only protection he had ever found against the thing he feared most: being left alone with himself. If there is a character or a show you want us to look at next, leave it in the comments. We read everyone.